And now, our feature program.
In 1956, Brooklyn's trolley lines made a final mournful run. City construction coordinator Robert Moses boasted he wished he could tear up every inch of track himself. A number of Brooklyn businesses had either closed or moved away. The borough's 114-year-old daily newspaper, the Eagle, had folded. The building where Walt Whitman put the finishing touches on Leaves of Grass came down. On September 24, 1957, Tex Rickard announced the starting lineups as the Dodgers' aging captain led his team onto the field one last time. Brooklyn watched as another slice of its past quietly slipped into the night. In 1950, Branch Rickey's contract as Dodger president expired. The commissioner's office ordered him to sell his Dodger stock before he took a job with the Pittsburgh Pirates. That same year, major stockholder John L. Smith died of cancer. Walter O'Malley obtained control of Smith's shares from his widow. He then zeroed in on Branch Rickey's 25%. O'Malley had his old rival where he wanted him. But Rickey knew a few tricks of his own. Branch Rickey made a deal with realtor and close friend William Zeckendorf, who made a phony offer to buy Rickey's stock for $1 million. O'Malley had no choice but to counter.
Zeckendorf represented Mr. Rickey. So when they came over to collect the money, they demanded $1,050,000 because Mr. Zeckendorf, a real estate agent, got 5%. So 5% of the $1 million was $50,000, and Waller had to put up the extra $50,000.
At the press conference, the two men expressed the warmest regard for each other. Rickey called O'Malley a man of youth and courage, enterprise and desire. O'Malley responded by saying he had the warmest possible feeling for Rickey as a person. O'Malley celebrated his victory with friends at the Bossert Hotel. After several drinks, they played Pin the Tail on the Donkey. The donkey was made to resemble Branch Rickey.
Mr. Rickey won the battle, but I think Waller won the war because I think Mr. Rickey would have liked to have 50% of the Dodgers rather than nothing of Pittsburgh.
Rickey told Red Barber, "Walter O'Malley is the most devious man I ever met."
Let's see what else we have here. Here's a pin of the Jackie Robinson stamp. I love baseball, of course. A spigot from Schaefer Beer. The Ebbets Field Cafe in Hicksville, Long Island. I've got an Ebbets Field pin there that says the Jewel of Flatbush. Here's a reproduced pin, Keep the Dodgers in Brooklyn. Brooklyn Dodgers National League champs. I've duplicated the Ebbets Field scoreboard here, probably from about 50 different composite pictures. I'm told it's accurate to 1/100th of an inch. Abe Stock owned the clothing store. If you won a suit, you'd have to hit the sign on a fly right here. But Abe Stock knew what he was doing. He wouldn't have to give away very many suits because Carl Furillo was patrolling right field, and there wasn't virtually anything that got past him. But I, tried to bring it all together there and have what I thought was a traditional Dodger and Giant lineups. If you notice, the one I left out was Bobby Thompson. I just couldn't bring myself to put him in the Giant lineup. It was mentioned in the the New York Times that Ebbets Field was being taken apart, the seats were being sold. I immediately wrote to my father, who had also been a big Brooklyn Dodger fan. I said, if you ever loved me, if there's anything you want to do for me, I'll ask only one favor in my entire life. Please get me 1 or 2 seats from Ebbets Field. I love them. They look beautiful. It's something, you know, that makes you identify with your family, your father, your childhood. It's, you know, just a part of you. I really got carried away with it, as most Brooklyn fans do.
Few Brooklyn fans got as carried away as the cowbell lady, Hilda Chester. During one game, Hilda agonized over a struggling Dodger pitcher. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She handed Pete Reiser a note to give to his manager, Leo DeRocher.
Okay, so Pete Reiser hands Leo the note, and the note says, "Put you, Casey, in the game." Well, the Dodgers bat, and Leo puts you, Casey, in the game, and they lose the game. And after the game, Leo is absolutely furious. He says to Pete, he says, "You tell that SOB McPhail never to give me another note like that again." And Pete said to him, "What note? McPhail didn't give you a note." Leo said, "This note. Who'd you get this note from?" Pete says, "I got the note from Hilda Chester." This is one case of Dodger fan changing the history of the game.
But it was an egg-shaped former big band leader who endeared the team to Brooklyn's youth. By the mid-50s, the Dodgers televised all their home games and more than 20 away games. The pregame show, Happy Felton's Knothole Gang, was among the most popular programs on TV.
And the format was the players would go down to the right field corner, and Happy would interview the young students, and they would talk to the players, and maybe Pee Wee would hit the young guy a few ground balls, and they'd go on the show, and then there'd be a winner.
I was picked a lot, the Happy Felton's Knothole Gang, and Roy Campanella always chose me. So I must have gotten 4 or 5 gloves from Roy Campanella. And me, 4 or 5 gloves at the age of 8, 9, 10 years old was just amazing.
While many whites moved out of New York for parcels of a 1,500-acre potato farm on Long Island, a second wave of Southern blacks was migrating into northern cities following the war. In Brooklyn, nearly 95,000 African Americans arrived by the mid-50s. Developer William Levitt of Levittown said, "We can solve a housing problem, or we can solve a racial problem, but we cannot solve the two."
There were problems in the economic level. People who are not making as much money came in. With those problems, you have increased crime. There's no question those are problems.
What happened in Brooklyn around 1955, 1956, is you could almost see the blocks, block by block, turn from all white to all black. And it advanced towards Ebbets Field. Because what would happen, a couple of black families would move into a block, and then the real estate brokers would then march to the rest of the people on the block and say, "Look, you have blacks moving into the neighborhood. Pretty soon it's going to be all black. It's to your benefit to sell your house now, and I'll sell it for you."
Unfortunately, government was unaware of the process. That is true. The increase of affluence of white was greater rate than blacks. Consequently, more whites would it be for because of increased affluence or because of racial reasons moved out. Yes, blacks will move in, or Hispanics will move in to the areas abandoned by whites. The relationship between those whites remaining and those blacks moving in is not a good relationship. There was no preparation for it.
Wealth was moving out to the suburbs. It was harder for people who had the money, who were going to support a team, to get to Ebbets Field.
O'Malley showing favored newspapermen, of which I was one, letters from people who had bought season tickets over the years, returning them back so that their own people didn't want to go to night games.
A new generation of Dodger fan was now content watching the game from his living room in the suburbs. The Federal Housing Act of 1949 proposed the redevelopment of rundown urban areas. O'Malley had his sights set on a piece of rundown land at the corner of Atlantic and Flatbush Avenues where the Long Island Railroad had a terminal. It was here O'Malley envisioned a new stadium. The chief administrator of the Federal Housing Act was Robert Moses.
He wanted Moses, under this authority of the Federal Housing Act, to assemble the parcels at Atlantic and Flatbush, these individually owned pieces of land, to condemn them, you compensate the owners, you assemble it into a single package, and then sell that to O'Malley.
Now, there'd be no need for parking because everyone would be coming on the subway or the Long Island Railroad. And you could probably get 40,000 people coming in that area in half an hour. No doubt about it. That's what Waller had in mind. He felt that people that wouldn't pay the $1 to park would buy the hot dog with it.
Robert Moses did not like mass transportation because he built highways. He wanted people to drive on his highways, to go over his bridges and through his tunnels to pay tolls, which supported the Robert Moses infrastructure.
This whole proposal would have done so much for the Long Island Railroad. It would have given them more depot space, would have allowed them to improve their entire operations.
Robert Moses doesn't support Robert Wagner. Robert Wagner doesn't get reelected mayor. So Robert Wagner, although in public says all the right things, yes, we want the Dodgers to be in Brooklyn, they should never leave Brooklyn, the Dodgers are a part of Brooklyn, behind closed doors, Robert Wagner is ambivalent at best.
A lot of Moses's dreams and a lot of Moses's antagonisms toward the Long Island Railroad, toward the subways, toward having a stadium, not getting his stadium in Flushing Meadow Park, and this ego clash with O'Malley, everything was combining to make sure that Robert Moses was not going to lift a finger to help this proposal.
Moses had his own dream, a $10 million multi-purpose sports facility, complete with 12,000 parking spaces on the former site of the World's Fair in Flushing Meadow.
I think Moses' idea was to put a stadium owned and operated by the city or the county out in Nassau County or Suffolk County. And my dad said, no, the stadium ought to be built in Brooklyn, and I want to build it, I want to design it, I want it to be a baseball-only facility, not a multi-purpose facility. I don't want to be the tenant of a mayor or a city council or a county board of supervisors.
Moses came up the tough way, the hard way, and he was the #1 man in New York. And he wasn't about to let Waller get what he wanted. Even if Waller begged him for anything, Moses would not give in to Waller O'Malley.
Meanwhile, Norris Polson was elected mayor of Los Angeles on his anti-housing platform. What Angelenos call the Battle of Chavez Ravine was now under Polson's decree. The new mayor pondered what to do with the wooded hills of Elysian Park. There was talk of a zoo, a cemetery, even a jail.
The balloon busting fan is almost a daily customer. This one's for Ducky Medwick. You'll find everything in baseball's book, even superstition.
Ebbets Field had many treats for the senses, but it was the noise around the ballpark that made it so special. The Dodger Symphony Band pierced the cacophony.
O'Malley got into a hassle with the musicians union because of that Dodger Symphony, those 3 or 4 nitwits who were worked on the subways during the day and at night came out and played the trombone and banged the drum and stuff. So the American Federation of Musicians sends O'Malley a note. These guys have to join the union. See? Oh, they're entertainers. And in 1952, New York City was a real strong union town. So O'Malley said, well, I can't do anything with that, so you just destroyed the Dodger Symphony. But he set up something called Music Depreciation Night, and he invited, maybe 30 30 different high school bands to come in, and free. And fans, the fans could come in by holding an instrument. And 30 bands started to play Roll Out the Barrel. Oh, God. And eventually he settled with the union.
Hey, oh baby, won't you please? Oh, I'm the Sheik of Araby. Hey, oh yeah, hey.
We love to dance. I love to dance. But I don't get around. I don't get around anymore. The Brooklyn Dodgers Symphony Band started many years ago. We didn't know that we were going to be so popular.
There used to be 3 umpires, and they used to come out on the field. And when they used to come out on the field, we were ready to play 3 blind mice. See how they run. Now, Walker Cooper was with the St. Louis Cardinals, and he was a very dangerous hitter. And when he used to come at the plate, always got base hits. We couldn't wait for him to make out. But we finally, when he used to make out, we used to play till he got to the bench. Well, he got so used to us because when he used to get to the bench, we used to, as soon as he sat down, we'd, you know. But then he got so wise to us that he used to do it, and he used to fool us at times. And he'd go right to the bench, and we were ready, waiting for him. He wouldn't sit down. He'd go to the water cooler, and he'd want a drink. And then we'd play, How Dry I Am. This was all a sort of a get-together, all in fun. Everything was done in fun with malice towards none. We enjoyed it.
Well, the famous story about Ebbets Field was that it was a small field. It was a bandbox, 32,000 people. If the Higbee was pitching a no-hitter in the 8th inning, a woman, I don't know where she came from, she turned around, she took the pocketbook, as she hit Brother Lou on the head. They hit the band, she wanted to break the drum and off. Don't rattle him, don't rattle him. I said, lady, why don't you be nice? This is baseball. The Dodger fans were the duffiest fans in the entire world of baseball. There's nobody can beat the Dodger fans for fun. Nobody. I want to say something else now.
Before you start, he wants to...
The fellas that died?
Go ahead, no. He wants to know, how did you feel when the Dodgers moved out and went to L.A.?
Well, first of all, when they went to L.A., I was crying like a baby.
Probably no one opponent was more loved than Stan the Man, whose nickname was a gift from the Brooklyn fans.
Stan Musial. He gave us agita. He gave us heartburn. He was the most fearsome hitter that ever came into Ebbets Field. He got his nickname, the Man, after a doubleheader in 1946.
Well, you know, we had a great rivalry going with the Dodgers. You know, they had some great teams back in the 40s and late 40s, and we did, the Cardinals did too, you know, and my emotion was, adrenaline was flowing when we played the Dodgers.
Charlie the Brow or somebody would bring the bats out, and we'd say, hey, Rube, go over there, let's get those Stan's bats. We'd get them. We'd get every one of them and bring them back and put them in our dugout someplace. And here comes Stan out looking.
They were disappearing, and every series, not only one series, but every series, well, we couldn't figure it out. But never would I suspect it was that little gentleman, Pee Wee Reese, and Rube Walker. They were taking my good game bats. But you know, they didn't bother, didn't affect me because I could always hit that Dodger pitch.
Over 2 seasons, 1948 and 49, Musial's batting average at Ebbets Field, .535.
Well, my father, you know, when he came to the States, he lived in Manhattan, and just by osmosis became a New York Giant fan. So I became a Giant fan living in Flatbush and living in Brooklyn, and around 1941, the Dodgers sort of began to emerge, and so I, you know, had a little croak.
In Brooklyn, to be a Giant was to be hated. and the player most hated was Sal Magley. They called him the Barber for the close shaves he gave from the mound.
He had a big, heavy beard, and he had kind of walked a little funny, kind of like his right arm was kind of down. He'd walk kind of like he's walking sideways. And when he was in Ebbets Field and he was pitching, when he came out of their clubhouse and we were coming in, you could pass in the runway, and you look at him, here he comes, and he would never smile. And those eyes would look right at you, and you didn't know whether to speak to him or not.
I remember my first game over there, I hit 2 home runs off of Don Newcomb. I come out, all 4 of my tires was flattened. That was my introduction to Brooklyn at that time. And I went home and I told Leo, I am not going back over there unless somebody get my car.
Newcomb and Jackie were hollering at DeRocher over on the giant bench in the Polo Grounds. And they were kidding him about being married to Lorraine Day. And asking if embarrassing questions about, you have on Lorraine's Chanel today and things like that. And Leo got mad and he come charging over towards the bench, and a couple of the giant players had to restrain him, and Jackie and Nuke were just breaking up laughing.
Enemy territory was at 157th Street and 8th Avenue in Harlem. The Dodger players nicknamed it after the most dreaded disease of the time, the polio grounds. 1951 became a showdown between managers, Leo DeRocher for the Giants and Charlie Dressen for the Bums.
Charlie was so engrossed in out managing Leo that he managed us right out of winning the pennant. I mean, we had a 13-game lead, and then Charlie, to me, choked, and he used 5 pitches basically for the last 7 weeks of the season and wore 'em out.
Let the other clubs talk now, poke fun at us, make wisecracks about us, DeRocher said in 1951. There's a long way to go before the season is over.
The old Dodger locker room in Ebbets Field, prior to this, there used to just be a door that the clubhouse men used to go back and forth into, and now they had walled it up with brick. And Charlie wanted us to go over and sing, "Roll out the barrel, we've got the Giants on the run."
The Giants were unstoppable. Asked if he were a miracle worker, DeRocher answered, "The hell with that. It's a brand new season. It's a new game for cash money." One game would decide the 51 pennant. A home run would become baseball's most vivid moment.
Hole number 13.
I got a table radio, put the game on. Now I hear that they've knocked Magley out and they've scored the runs, and Newcomb, according to the announcers, throwing smoke. I'm disgusted, so I slammed the radio off the shelf, broke it.
We went into the 9th inning 4-1. Just the worst feeling I'd ever had in my life. I remember thinking we just weren't good enough to go beyond this point.
In the 9th, however, the Giants rallied. The game was held up when Don Mueller injured his ankle sliding into 3rd. Waiting on deck, Bobby Thompson. For Brooklyn, Ralph Branca replaced Don Newcomb.
Once they carried Don Mueller off the field, and Leo DeRocher, who was coaching at 3rd, had come up and said, "Bobby, if you ever hit one now." I thought, "You're out of your mind, Leo." I never even looked at him. And walking to home plate, I'd never done that to myself before. I psyched myself up, telling myself to get up there, wait and watch. Give yourself a chance to hit. And of course, you know what happened.
I didn't hear the Russ Hodges broadcast, but I heard Red Barber, who did one of the best announcing jobs I ever heard in my life.
Delivers the curved forward and throws it deep back to left field. It is a home run, and the New York Giants win the National League pennant, and the Polo Grounds go wild.
For 59 seconds, Red was speechless. His silence best symbolized the loss that would linger in the minds of Brooklyn fans for generations to come.
Well, friends, we're going to try and get back above the screaming, howling, tempestuous noise that has reached an unprecedented height. And never was there a more dramatic finish to a pennant race. They just couldn't be.
There's a fence that's about 35 feet high. And right across, maybe 20 feet from the fence, there's a window. And I see this guy, and people don't believe it to this day, but I see him. He's looking out the window, and I could read his lips. And he's a Jewish guy with a yarmulke, and I read the lips with the accent. And that sounds crazy. And I thought his lips said, "The Giants win, Bobby Thompson hits a home run." So I go to the fence, and I climb the fence where I'm almost looking at the level of his eyes. And I said, "What happened?" And now I could hear him, and sure enough, the guy spoke with the accent that I read. He said, "The Giants win, Bobby Thompson hit a home run." I jumped at 30 feet down. Didn't even feel anything.
When Bobby Thompson hit that home run, I was actually already an actor, and I was about to audition for something, and in the waiting room of this producer's office, somebody had a portable radio, and I heard it just before I walked into the audition. And it was probably one of the best auditions I've ever given in my life. I mean, I laughed, I cried, I yelled. Of course, the scene didn't need all that stuff.
My grandmother picked up the radio from my great-grandmother's ear and broke it. It's apropos of breaking a television today, but that radio was trashed. And she said, "I'll never listen to another ball game for the rest of my life." Of course, the first Dodger game the next year, she had a new radio.
The guy in the locker room came up to me and said, "Bobby, we'd like you to be on the Perry Como show. We'll give you $500. Thank you, but I just want to get home to my family and, share this moment with them." And he said, "We'll give you $1,000. So I ended up going to the Perry Como show that night.
I didn't go home. I went out to a dinner with Ann, my fiance. That Ann met me in the car in the parking lot, and she had with her a cousin who was a priest. And naturally, I said, "Why me?" So I was, clean living guy. I loved baseball and always in shape. And why me? And he said, "Well, God chose you because he knew your faith would be strong enough to bear this cross." I've served my sentence. Guys commit murder and they get sentenced for life, and after 20 years they get pardoned. And I've never been pardoned. I mean, there's still people who, I call them stupid fans who that's all they want to talk about or bring up. And my most angry moment comes when I get introduced to a guy and he doesn't say, "Hi, Ralph, nice to meet you." He says, "Oh, Bobby Thompson."
The Dodgers netted over $1.7 million from 1952 to 1956. The closest National League team in revenue was the youth-oriented Milwaukee Braves, who had relocated from Boston in 1953.
Everyone in baseball saw that at that time the Milwaukee Braves were drawing about 2 million people a year, and the others, the Dodgers included, were drawing about 1 million people a year. And sooner or later, that competitive balance would be out of sync.
In 1956, Walter O'Malley sold Ebbets Field to developer Marvin Crater. O'Malley and Crater agreed that the Dodgers would occupy the stadium until the end of 1959. Ebbets Field was about to be abandoned. The question now, would Brooklyn? October 1956. The Subway Series made its last run. Don Larson's perfect game derailed the Dodgers that year. Rebuffed by the New York Board of Estimate, O'Malley decided that dealing with Robert Moses had become futile. While O'Malley plotted his next move, Coast League owner Phil Wrigley, the chewing gum magnate, wanted to leave L.A.
I'll never forget, in 1957 at the Baseball Writers' Dinner in New York, Mr. Phil Wrigley was on the dais, and Walter O'Malley knew that Mr. Wrigley was having trouble with the city of Los Angeles because they wanted to annex Catalina Island, and Mr. Wrigley owned Catalina. So we had the Fort Worth Club, and he had the Los Angeles Club. So Walter O'Malley wrote a note to Mr. Wrigley on the dais saying that we'll trade you Fort Worth for Los Angeles. Well, it's a city of 500,000 compared to a city of 5 million. It didn't make sense to me.
National League President Warren Giles told the Dodger president that if he were serious about moving his club west, another team would have to accompany him. Horace Stoneham had contemplated moving his nearly bankrupt club from Harlem to Minneapolis. O'Malley persuaded Stoneham to travel to San Francisco and look at a potential site in the Candlestick Point area.
He took them there in the morning when the sun shone brightly, when there was no wind, when it was absolutely beautiful, and Horace Stoneham was sold. He thought, what a great place for a ballpark. Well, not only did they build one of the ugliest ballparks in the history of baseball, but as you know, as soon as the afternoon rolls around, this incredibly stiff wind blows off from the bay. And, you know, you could hit a pop-up, and the second baseman can call for it, and the right fielder can catch it.
When O'Malley was talking about going to Los Angeles, one of the reasons he went there was there was a gentleman named Matty Fox who had in what he called Skyatron, and this was going to be a pay television situation, long before what we know now as cable television. The pay television was really the bait that Walter O'Malley used to get Horace Stoneham and the Giants to go to San Francisco, with the great promise of all these pay television riches, which never materialized.
O'Malley had to do the best-selling job he could to get Horace Stoneham to take the Giants into San Francisco. And I got to tell you, he was at his best during this move.
City Councilwoman Rosalind Wyman, 26 years old and pregnant, now had the arduous task of delivering the Brooklyn Dodgers to Los Angeles.
First place, I put a series of resolutions on the floor that then gets referred like to a committee. And then you start, you know, let's bring Major League Baseball, what's involved with it, you know, is it complicated? And then obviously the O'Malley showed interest. So then, you know, we set about putting an organization together to start dealing with the O'Malleys to talk to them.
On August 19th, 1957, the Giants announced their move to San Francisco. Horace Stoneham apologized to the kids of New York, but added, "I didn't see many of your parents in the Polo Grounds in recent years." In light of the Giants' move, Robert Moses commented, "The great American game will be about as respected, attractive, and inspiring as lady wrestling." Nelson Rockefeller and Mayor Robert Wagner met with O'Malley in an 11th-hour attempt to help secure the Atlantic Flatbush site. O'Malley agreed to hold off any decisions. He was accused of playing both coasts. Arthur Daly of the New York Times stated, "Only the elastic O'Malley can ride two horses in opposite directions." Meanwhile in L.A., the city fathers and mother frantically pushed forward.
Well, there was tremendous opposition to the bringing the Dodgers, and they would have community meetings to fight them. And so we needed to have somebody who looked, you know, not like they were big businessmen or very important. And my mother was just a wonderful human being and wanted this baseball team more than probably even I did. And so, in fact, she was our spy to the opposition meetings.
An agreement was finally reached. If the Dodgers came to Los Angeles, they would receive approximately 300 acres of land at Chavez Ravine. Both the city and the county would spend nearly $5 million to create access roads and improve existing ones to and from the ballpark. Both the Dodgers and the city of L.A. would share in oil and mineral rights when stadium construction started. An October 1st deadline imposed by Major League Baseball forced O'Malley to make a decision.
And I had the city council had bomb threats along this period, and then my life was personally threatened. I mean, it's hard to believe over bringing a Major League Baseball team to L.A. that your life would be threatened.
So what's this New York team doing coming out here? There were a lot of people who weren't thrilled about that. And more than that, I think there really is this populist and progressive sentiment out there that any time the government is getting together with somebody who has money, it's probably bad. It's probably going to cost us something.
The day before the vote, Polson and Wyman were still waiting for O'Malley's commitment.
The final day, Polson kept calling me because we were getting closer and closer to the final vote. And he kept saying, "We have to know he's absolutely coming." And I said, I don't want to make the phone call. Call him, Mayor, you find out. So finally he dialed, they dialed, and he handed me the phone. And he said to me, he was a New Yorker, his family was in New York, he loved New York, he loved Brooklyn. And I had to say, well, you know, do you think you will come? And he said to me, I don't honestly know.
I think he had cold feet. You were born and raised in New York, live out in Long Island, you've made all this money, your family's here, you're raising your kids here, and now you're going to move to Los Angeles?
Our office was in Montague Street, and every Friday, Walt and I would look out the window, and there'd be a lineup, then maybe 300 or 400 people, all Puerto Ricans, getting their unemployment checks. And that really settled in Walter's mind that there's no way Brooklyn could ever afford a baseball club.
Just before midnight on September 30th, prior to the council's final vote, Polson panicked. He wired National League President Warren Giles and told him the council had voted in favor of the move. Polson's action sent the council into a tailspin, nearly killing the vote. National League owners gave O'Malley one more week, or suffered the mercy of Robert Moses. On October 7th, the LA City Council voted 10-4 in favor of the move. It was now official. Walter O'Malley refused to attend the press conference in New York. Back at his home in Ohio, Branch Rickey got word of the move.
Coincidentally, I happened to be with him when he got the news. And he said, that's just a terrible betrayal of the most loyal fans anywhere in the game. And that was the last mention I ever heard him make of it.
The day we greeted Walter O'Malley at the plane, he'd come in for our first civic ceremony, a process server ran up the stairs. And O'Malley leaned over to me and he said, Roz, what is that? And I said, Walter, just keep walking, I'll tell you later.
Mr. O'Malley, greetings from the citizens of Los Angeles. We're glad to have you here. Here's a summons from the people of the Chavez Ravine. Mrs. Martin would like to have you come. We're glad to have you. Believe me.
And I mean, then I had to explain to him, there's a lawsuit. It's a process server. You're being sued. It was terrible for a while.
The 1957 Dodgers finished a mediocre season in third place. For the first time in over 11 years, there was no excitement of a pennant race in Brooklyn, no anticipation of a World Series.
I didn't want to play that last game, but I remember sitting on the bench, and I don't know who I was talking with, but I said, you know, this is probably the last game ever played at Ebbets Field for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And I says, the lights don't even look like they've taken effect. It looks gloomy here tonight. There are only 6,000 people, weren't making too much noise. And this was a very, very sad remembrance for me, that last night at Ebbets Field.
September 24, 1957. Danny McDevitt pitched a 2-0 shutout for the Dodgers.
It's like leaving a second home, really. Having to think of my family, what's going to happen to my family now? Instead of going to friendly faces, we're going to go to faces we don't even know. I think all of us were kind of hurt at that time when we knew it was going to be our last game there, and we only had 6,000 people.
Organist Gladys Gooding's last song was May the Good Lord Bless and Keep You. The fans sadly watched as their team completed the long walk from Ebbets Field into Myth. Tex Rickard made his last announcement. Please don't go on the field. Use the nearest exit gate that leads to Chavez Ravine.
I think the Dodgers going west were one of the pivotal things in American society that broke down, few things broke down what our image of ourselves was. The Dodgers belong to us. And then we discovered sports doesn't love us. It doesn't love us. In fact, it don't care for us.
And I could tell you, the move of the Brooklyn Dodgers clearly was indicative of racism in the American culture and in the American business community and in baseball itself. The move out of Brooklyn was probably a sensational business deal if it ever could have been made. It was the most disastrous, to me, decision in terms of relationship of pro sports to a community.
Had the stadium been built, I think the Dodgers naturally would have stayed. So Brooklyn would still have much of its identity. I've always thought that as soon as the Dodgers left, that Brooklyn really lost its identity.
And we couldn't understand why Waller, a true-bred New Yorker, wanted to move to California. We just couldn't understand. And of course, later on we realized it was the dollar talking, not anything else.
Walter O'Malley's an evil name to me. It's unforgivable. Unforgivable what he did to a borough and to a city, just for greed.
I have to agree with the people in Brooklyn who say Walter O'Malley's a devil because he took something away from them.
April 1958. 3 days of record snow hit the Atlantic coast. In Brooklyn, when spring finally arrived, it was in climate and calendar only.
I went out to Ebbets Field, I guess late December 1959. Obviously, it's the first time I ever saw Ebbets Field in the dead of winter, and everything had not yet been destroyed. It was intact, but the grass was still very high. And in a way, I was glad that I saw it one last time and had a chance to take a couple of pictures and run around the infield for a minute and touch the Schaefer scoreboard.
We boarded this plane and took this strange flight over the Rocky Mountains to San Francisco. I think that's when it hit the players, that era is closed.
Well, there wasn't real euphoria until we had the parade. There was a parade, a civic parade. And I got to tell you, Los Angeles never has parades. We're not New York. I mean, the parades are a joke in LA. And I have to tell you, though, we staged I thought one of the great parades of all times. And I rode in a car with Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale. But Sandy turned to me, and I'll never forget, and he said, "We have more people crossing the street in New York than are out for this parade."
In 1959, the Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series, defeating the White Sox. What had taken 3 generations in Brooklyn took 2 years in Los Angeles.
And when Scully, the second year, said, we won, and we go to Chicago for the World Series, horns started blaring in the city, and I felt as a public official, it was the first time my city finally came together for something. The East Side, the West Side, wealthy people, poor people, identified with the Dodgers. And I think from that point on, the Dodgers have been an identifying force in the city of Los Angeles.
This was a night in LA at the Dodger Hotel Biltmore. You had this banquet room. Well, on the wall of a long wall, the Dodgers had chose to fly the 1955 World Championship flag, the only one they had ever won in Brooklyn, and it decorated the hotel headquarters. Well, I was offended by this, as were some of my colleagues. So we hatched the plot to steal that flag.
In December 1961, after standing nearly a half century, Ebbets Field would become merely a scar in the topography.
My lifestyle, largely morning, noon, and night, revolved around the Brooklyn Dodgers. You sort of mark time by how the players were doing, how the team finished that year, how you did in the World Series.
What do you lose when you lose something like that? More than you can ever say. The disappearance of the American dream is really summarized in this one baseball team.
A couple of months later, on a beautiful spring day in Southern California, the Dodgers' heroic past gently collided with their brilliant future. Duke Snider's base hit to right field, the team's first hit in their new home, consummated Walter O'Malley's dream, Dodger Stadium.
I think it was a dream come true when Dodger Stadium was built, because it's what he really envisioned it to be. His legacy was that he thought a good team has to have a good ballpark, and then people will come.
The new Verrazano Narrows Bridge is the first link between Staten Island and the New York mainland and brings to fulfillment.
In 1964, Robert Moses completed construction on the world's longest bridge, the Verrazano. In 1965, following the LA Dodgers' third World Series win, Ranch Rickey died after delivering a speech on courage and spirituality.
I know in a TV interview that my grandfather did in '61, they asked him, what's the most, I'm not sure exactly what the word was, what's the most important experience in your life? And his response was, I can remember him taking the cigar out of his mouth, and he leaned forward and he says, I haven't had it yet.
Before his death, Rickey warned about the dangers of expansion, television, and baseball's bad publicity. He concluded, the successful solution of every problem facing professional baseball is based upon the integrity and devotion of the owners.
I must have had it for 10 years in my basement. Then I met Bavasi once, and I said to him, how come, Buzzy Bavasi, the Dodger general manager, I said, how come you never bothered to get that flag back? He said, well, we didn't care. You could have it. We just made up another one. It cost $92. So the flag is now in the Brooklyn Historical Society and can be seen by Brooklynites, and I feel proud of my role of having purloined the pennant, for whatever that's worth.
In 1964, Moses got his wish. Shea Stadium at Flushing Meadow. Moses remarked, when the Emperor Titus opened the Colosseum in 80 AD, he could have felt no happier.
After we left, they turned around and offered the Mets a remarkable deal. The Mets got all the concessions for both football and baseball. They got 3,500 parking spaces. They got almost rent-free a lease. And if they had offered Walter O'Malley that same deal, I do believe, and I really believe this, that we would still be in New York.
Moses, at this time, was building through Brooklyn. I mean, he was reshaping Brooklyn. And when people would talk to him about what we would call community values, a sense of community and neighborliness, he really wasn't understanding. He didn't even relate to that. When I became a writer and I started to do this book on Robert Moses, suddenly the circle closed, because here I was finding out, not that Moses was solely to blame for the team leaving, but that it would have been so easy for him to keep it here.
In 1968, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller forced Robert Moses to retire at the age of 79. In his final years, Moses was reduced to dropping names of the great men he had once known and defeated.
He lived out his life in bitterness and rage. He had to build. He had to dominate other men, impose his will on other men. I had known his brother, whom Moses destroyed. He made sure he never got a job. And the brother, in depression, would sometimes have what I guess is this family. He would go, oh, ho, 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 in an abstract way. And after he was removed from power, sometimes Moses would make that same sound.
Norrie Paulson was a really nice human being. He had some goals for the city, and I think we achieved some of them at the time.
Norris Paulson would eventually lose the office of mayor, largely due to the controversy surrounding Chavez Ravine.
And there was people who were saying you were putting people out of housing, which was not true, and that's the thing I kind of resent the most. The housing had been long settled. The housing problem was settled at that election, and there could be no more public housing. And actually, this land had been cleared sometime before.
Walter O'Malley presented his old ally with a gold key to Dodger Stadium. Paulson refused the gift. he feared he would be accused of taking a payoff. Before his death in 1981, Polson called Dodger Stadium his crowning achievement.
The leadership in New York, in my opinion, was stupid. I mean, they could have kept the Dodgers and the Giants to our fortune. O'Malley had the courage, the interest, the caring, the adventure, if you want to say, that I'm going west.
In 1978, Walter O'Malley received an award for meritorious service to baseball.
He was a great dad. He was very loving. He and my mother just had a great marriage, and when she had assistive strokes when she was in her 60s and was housebound, and they had always gone to ball games together, and she loved it just as much as he did. And she couldn't go, and so he didn't go. Some nights I'd bring some of the grandchildren in to see them, and I can sort of see the two of them just listening to the radio, listening to the ball games on the radio, sitting together, sort of holding hands, like, you know, they were just youngsters in love.
A year later, Walter O'Malley died of a heart attack. The Dodger legacy was now in the hands of his son, Peter.
One must wait until the evening to see how splendid the day has been. What happened to Brooklyn in the long run, in the evening, because the Dodgers aren't there anymore. What happened to all of us to whom this team meant so much is a very sad thought.
The bum, the Dodger bum, we never brought that with us to California. The Dodger bum stayed in Brooklyn. He's still there.
I see pictures now when I get in the mail sometime, and you got a picture of Hodges and Reese and Campanella and Jackie Robinson and Duke Snyder. You can see the expression on their face that there is a definite love for those guys, or for each other, really.
You know, last time I played Pepperwood, you didn't have great hair. In baseball, there is only one thing. The fans are great and everything else, but the only person that really matters is the guy you play with. And when he slaps you on the fanny or slaps you on the back, that's the greatest thrill of all.
Wait, we're almost 70.
I know you're
just 40.
Well, if you're holding your breath, that's
well,
a long
I'm holding
time.
as much as I can.
Well, who is 70? You 70?
No.
Every once in a while,
No.
I will get a feeling of some kind about those days, and I think about warming up in Ebbets Field. All the things are happening around you, all the color, all the noise. Yeah, I do that. I dream. I dreamed about that before I got there, and now I dream about it after it's over.
As a team, we enjoyed being with each other. The camaraderie was there, and the electricity was there because everybody liked everybody else.
I hope that someday that when the time comes that the good Lord will, you know, take me to where I'm supposed to go. Well, but after you was with that bunch in Brooklyn and went through what they did, the Lord's going to have to go some because I've already been a long ways towards it.
Was Walter O'Malley driven by greed? Was he responsible for Brooklyn's decline? Or was he a visionary, a pioneer? It all depends on who you ask. Standing here in the middle of Walter O'Malley's shining dream, the terms visionary and pioneer seem fitting. The Los Angeles Dodgers are perhaps the most successful franchise in the history of baseball. You can't take that away from the scorecard on Walter or Peter O'Malley. But for those of us who grew up and have grown older with the Dodgers, the Brooklyn part of the story has assumed an aura of Camelot. Your head tells you to admire the team that plays with such success here, but your heart mourns for the lost magic and for a special team that played long ago, far, far away on the ground floor of a special place in time. I'm Roger Kahn. Thanks for watching.